Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English, and we now turn to a series of comments regarding our overall year together. This is now comments to be made at the very beginning of our AP experience together. And we want to begin by giving some kind of sense of overview, specific to especially our study of the epic, which is going to be such an important part of our understanding of, as we will call it, Western thought as we begin our study of AP literature. Why begin and spend so much time with epics? The quick answer, I think anthropologists have pointed out to us, is that we are the stories that we tell, we are the stories we interpret, and we're the stories that we discard as well. Any civilization, any culture, has a series of stories that it tells, and for us in the Western literary tradition, those stories are built around epics. Okay? These usually long narrative kinds of texts that tell about heroes and all of that. Now, of course, we're going to get into the details of what we mean by epic, but we're going to just kind of give a general overview of the way in which the territory, the way in which the curriculum map will kind of look the way that it's going to look. And as we have pointed out often, and we will say, the map is not the territory. I mean, just because you know, obviously we've got to get into these texts. We'll either be reading in all or in part a good number of texts. We're going to begin actually though with Edith Hamilton's classic little text mythology, and I've given full lectures on that on Learn Strong. You go down that learnstrong.net, you go down that left hand side there, you're going to see that folder, and I do hope that you will have spent time both reading Hamilton's mythology as well as watching all of those lectures. And then after that we're going to turn to the Holy Trinity, we might say, of great epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, both attributed to some chap named Homer. We're going to have to ask about who that is. And then finally Virgil's classic, the Roman text, the Aeneid. After this work, we're going to pause for a moment, and we're going to jump out of epic specifically, and we're going to move to Greek drama and the Greek dramatic study. We're going to spend some time with Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle's Poetics is a seminal text for us in terms of telling us about what makes these tragedies such important texts during his time. We're going to study specifically Sophocles' Oedipus Rex as well as Antigone. You're going to want to go to the Harvard Classics lecture, of course, on learnstrong.net. That's those series of lectures that I'm engaged in sharing with you. And there you're going to want to watch lectures 59 to 68. As much as you can, study all of them. The three great tragedians as well as one play by Aristophanes that you're going to enjoy. Okay. We then, after that study, will look at a different kind of epic hero, Socrates. And we're going to pause and we're going to look at the Platonic dialogues, the Apology, the Crito, the Phaedo. I've given lectures already on the Harvard Classics, lectures numbers 5, 6, and 7, and you definitely will want to pay attention to that study. And then once we're there, we're going to move into our study of Plato's Republic. We will do an in-depth study of every book of Republic. We're going to argue that this is the greatest classic text of philosophy. And we're going to hear the ways in which, for example, Socrates will critique Homer, for example, and the text of the Iliad and the Odyssey as well, right? Alfred North Whitehead, the great philosopher, said that all of Western speculative thought is somehow a footnote to Republic. I think that's a bit probably hyperbolic, but there's a good argument to be made that you really want to know Republic to be able to really appreciate and read all of the texts that we'll be studying in AP literature, especially those epic texts. After Plato, we'll turn briefly to Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, as well as to the Stoic philosophy of both Aurelius as well as Epictetus. We'll be looking at the Harvard Classic lecture number 9 for Meditations, as well as number 8 for Epictetus from the Harvard Classics. Both of these will lead us to make some references to the great St. Augustine and his Confessions. Augustine is what we call a Neoplatonist, for reasons we'll get into. And you'll want to pay attention to the Harvard Classics lecture number 57 for that one, okay? We'll finally finish our study of political philosophy by studying and looking at the great Renaissance thinker Machiavelli and his classic, The Prince. And once we've kind of done that bit of work, taken that little bit of a hiatus into political thought, political theory, we'll then come back to more epic study. So you can kind of see how we're kind of moving in and out of the epic tradition all the way through our study in AP English. We'll come back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest epic stories, that will in fact tell us about a really important epic hero in Gilgamesh and all of the adventures that he has. Also really important because the Epic of Gilgamesh will tell us about a flood that occurs. This is a Babylonian epic poem. From there we'll turn to the first great Anglo-Saxon English epic poem, Beowulf, and we'll learn about Old English as we study that text. Right? Once we've spent our time with Beowulf, we'll then turn to the Arthurian motif. King Arthur is a great epic-styled hero, and a whole lot of what we've studied up to that point will lead us to our analysis and study of the great King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, and all of that. And of course, we'll pause to be able to celebrate as well, won't we? Monty Python's play, Strange Women Lying in Ponds is no basis for a system of government, Monty Python's Holy Grail. Once we're finished with the Arthurian motif, we'll then turn to the great Chaucer, the genius, the father of the English language, and his satiric, iconoclastic, we might say, Canterbury Tales. Here, interestingly, stories told on a journey, dare we say, odyssey to Canterbury. In some ways, I'm going to argue that Chaucer will bring everything that we've studied to that point together in profound and unique ways in his iconoclastic critique of three, at least, really important things. One, we'll see him critiquing the known church of the day and the hypocrisy of the church, especially as we study the Partner's Prologue and Tale. Then we're going to look at his critique of the patriarchy as it relates specifically to the Wife of Bath's prologue and, to some degree, Tale. And then finally, his critique of class nobility and the notion of class structure. Long before Karl Marx made these kinds of criticisms, we have them available for us with Chaucer, and we'll be talking about that in specifically the Wife of Bath's Tale. We'll then finish our first semester together by picking up one more epic poem, the towering figure of Dante, his Divine Comedy, but more particularly we will study the Inferno, okay? And Dante the Pilgrim goes through the afterlives of hell, purgatory, and paradiso. While he's going through Inferno, hell, he's being guided by none other than Virgil, the great poet of the Aeneid, right? So we're going to begin to see ourselves coming in some ways full circle, right? I mean, think of it this way. In many ways, this is the way our curriculum is set up, so that we can understand the contiguity and the way in which great ideas move from one thinker to the next, and they are in many ways transcended and included. And there's a certain kind of understanding that the writers who come after in some way kind of build or grow off of what came before. Starting with Homer, to St. Augustine, then to Dante, and then finally we'll pick up in the second semester Milton, and then beyond Milton we'll finish our time together with T.S. Eliot, and of course a few thinkers in between. After we finish with our Dante, at the very end of our first semester, we'll turn to our study of Shakespeare. And, I mean, you know, the argument has always been made, well, which is the greatest writer of all time? Many have argued that it's Shakespeare. We will argue that you can't have Shakespeare without all those people who came before that we will have studied. But we'll certainly pick up our study of Shakespeare. We're going to look very closely at a single play of Shakespeare's, namely Hamlet. And we're going to do a close line-by-line reading of that play. But at the same time, while we're reading Hamlet, we're going to as well be reading a few other of Shakespeare's plays in this order. Macbeth, Lear, two tragedies. We'll then pick up a comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, and then come back to the tragedy of Othello, then another comedy, Midsummer Night's Dream, finally finishing with one of the history plays, Henry V. Okay. We're going to cap up all of our study of Shakespeare, however, with reading Tom Stoppard's classic, existentialist classic, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Some of you will report but that may be your favorite text at the end of our AP time together. It is a brilliantly crafted text, and we will look at a wonderful presentation as well of that. Okay. Once we're there into the second semester, as we begin to move towards our spring, we're going to study some of the important English Renaissance poets, and that will bring us finally to the great John Milton and his Paradise Lost. Maybe the greatest epic of them all. There's always been debate about this. Certainly, Milton himself said that he was going to attempt things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. You're going to pay close attention to my Harvard Classics lectures at learnstrong.net. Lectures numbers 14 through 27 for Paradise Lost. Lectures number 28 through 33 for Paradise Regained. And when we finish that study, we will finally be able to begin to seriously make comment and critique on the epic tradition. Okay. From here, we're going to move into the 1800s, the English Romantic period with our important Wordsworth as well as Coleridge. We'll pick up some Burns study, and then we'll move into that sometimes referred to as the second generation of Romantic writers in Byron and Shelley and Keats. And then we'll continue on through the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, culminating with our study of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and Four Quartets. So we start off with the Iliad, and we end with Wasteland 1922 and Four Quartets 1941. Right? Now, we need to know these stories so we can critique these stories. I would write that line down. We need to know these texts if we're going to critique these texts. Notice our goal, as we've always said in 303, is to appreciate texts. We're not going to ask that you like these texts or even enjoy these texts, although, be careful, you may find yourself doing both of those things, liking and enjoying, but that's not our agenda. Our agenda is to rather ask important questions. Now, of course, the way we do that is through our learning theory, connecting new information to old information all the time. And when we do that through our learning annotation, we're always asking those three guiding questions. Level 1, what does the text say? Here we're just giving a brief outline. Level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, the rhetoric. Not what the poet says, but how the poet says it, right? And finally, at level 3, how can I relate to a text like this? Taking us back to our learning theory, how can I relate to a text like this? So for example, at 3A, we'll ask, how can I relate what I'm studying here to other texts that I know of from before? And obviously, within the epic tradition, we'll constantly be asking this question. So for example, we'll pick up our Beowulf and we'll ask, how do I see some things in Beowulf in the Anglo-Saxon Code, which looks very much like what I was working with in the notions of the warrior code of the Iliad. Finally, at 3B, and most importantly, we'll ask about every one of the texts that we study in AP. How can I relate to this text in some way? By relate, here we mean, how can I critique it in some way, right? Finally, let's turn now to Hamilton's mythology. We've got on learnstrong.net, we've got the full lectures ready to go there, okay? And so we'll ask you to begin with part 4 and what we call the Troy Tale, okay? And then from there we'll move into the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. Well, let's be challenged to think and to grow together. In book 9 of the Iliad, just to finish, Achilles has withdrawn from the war because his girl was taken from him and he's really mad about that. And finally Agamemnon has realized that he's messed up. And so he sends 3 men to come to Achilles to try to help get some, change of mind here. And Achilles, we'll study these lines together. Achilles, we see him sitting outside, in his tent, playing a lyre and singing songs of fallen heroes. That is to say, he's singing epic songs. Notice the irony. We are in an epic, the greatest epic of them all, the Iliad. And here we have the great warrior Achilles wanting to sing songs of heroes. Well, I welcome you to a year of study together in AP English. I'm excited. I hope that you're excited. We'll pick up right away with our study of the Iliad. I thank you, and I apologize for the phone that interrupted us. Thank you.